Today we find ourselves once again in beautiful Miami discussing crypto, discussing decentralization, discussing alternative ecosystems for financial products and financial plays. We talk about crypto, we talk about the markets, but it's time to bring experts to converse these things. Today we have Rich Rhines, core contributor or initial contributor of Core DAO, one of the hottest projects inside of the Bitcoin ecosystem, inside of the top 100 multi-billion-dollar market cap project. Today, we're going to be discussing what it takes to build a project, what it takes to be involved in the decentralized space, what it takes to be in the business game, and what it takes to build a billion-dollar ecosystem. Rich Rhines, welcome to Money Talks. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to chat.
Now, before we get started and we start talking about how you got into crypto, how you got into getting involved with a project, building it out, getting it to $1 billion in valuation plus, getting billions of dollars of Bitcoin already inserted into, is it billions of dollars? Is it
hundreds of millions.
250 million.
There's 350 million staked on the Bitcoin side, and then about 350 million that's on-chain TVL as well.
TVL, and what's that? Is that stables?
It's mostly Bitcoin.
Mostly Bitcoin.
Yep.
Epic. And then there's over 100 projects currently built
Correct.
on top of the chain.
And about another 100 waiting in the wings as well.
And 7 million plus users.
Yeah.
Incredible. And all of this in what, 2 years? A little bit less than 2 years?
A little bit less, yeah.
Incredible. Now, how did you get started? What's the come up of the entrepreneurial journey? Because obviously you didn't start at this place with 7 million plus users, $1 billion in market cap. Where did it all get started? What was your first kind of taste of entrepreneurship?
I was going to say, it depends on how far back you want to go. So it started really young. I've got like the lemonade stand story and like all that bullshit, but sorry, can you swear on this?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
No worries.
But it really started in college. So in college, I went to BC. I met this really interesting group of folks, and there was this Boston College venture competition. And I learned what startups were for the first time. And it made sense to me for the first time that like you could carve a path out there where there was the possibility to go create. And like by definition, I'm a very creative person, and that's just how my brain works. And I was never quite cut out for having a boss, I think is the right way to put that. And through that journey, we met a lot of interesting startups that were in the BC ecosystem. Like one of them was WePay that was out of Y Combinator. And there were all these interesting pieces where we got exposed to the startup scene, not just in Boston, but also in Silicon Valley. And then I think it was 2011, we did a trip called Tech Trek. It brought us through to Facebook, Google. Like I was just mind blown. I was like, wow, this is what you can create from 0 to 1 if you're a founder. And I knew that's what I wanted to do with the rest of my career. So I think we built our first company. We were 18, went absolutely nowhere, but we learned a ton of lessons. And then from there, we tried a bunch of other stuff, found myself in Silicon Valley, and I can kind of dive through that kind of part of the career arc as well. But super young and knew pretty early on that I wanted to build stuff.
Now, you were self-taught, and a lot of what you've accomplished is through self-education. A lot of people think that in order to get started or build a meaningful or successful career that you have to have some sort of formal education. Run me through that process where you're like, hey, you know what? Entrepreneurship seems like the logical route. I don't want to have a boss. I want to be a boss. I want to kind of create and do my own thing, to actually rolling up the sleeves and now actually getting good at the craft. What's the process there?
So part of that is like, inert is part of me is like, I am kind of a very self-driven, self-motivated person where if I want to learn something, I can just focus on it for like 12 hours at a time and eventually like kind of pick it up pretty quickly. But it was more that I had all these ideas to run businesses, but no one to build them. And that was really my problem. I tell everybody that like I was a self-taught engineer. I almost failed like my intro to programming class because I couldn't pay attention. Like it was so boring and so whatever. But then very quickly I taught myself how to program and like, far surpassed what that was supposed to be. But it was more that people couldn't kind of get with my vision of the world. They couldn't see where I was trying to bring stuff, and I had to teach myself. But it wound up being a really amazing process because I understood the nuts and bolts of what it really takes to build these things. And I think the unfair advantage, particularly in crypto, is if you have a business mind and engineering background. I told people for years before I did crypto full time this was what was meant for me. Like I studied economics and information systems. That's what crypto is, like fundamentally. But back in 2009, obviously like those dots weren't connected. Like that made no sense. Those were two like totally separate things that made no sense in overlap. And then once crypto clicked, it made perfect sense.
Now, Crypto clicks. It makes sense. You dive first in, but initially you're working at Coinbase, right? That was your first exposure in crypto with the crypto kind of scene, or were you had some stuff that before you did wallets, you had a couple own projects rolling before, but before Core DAO, what was kind of like your crypto scene?
So going back to college quickly, we had a professor that was teaching us information security. He tried to get us involved in Bitcoin, I think in 2011.
Wow.
He has some serious bags. I was like, magic internet money. Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't understand the thesis behind it. And then one of the other initial contributors to Core, CJ, he actually started in 2012. I missed that run from like $20 to like 200 or whatever. And then I was like, all right, 2013, let me read the Bitcoin white paper, like figure it all out. And it just clicked. Like, it made sense to me, this alternative traditional financial system, non-sovereign store of value. Like, I was totally hooked. It made a lot of sense to me. Kind of dabbled around for a couple years, just like getting more involved in Bitcoin, understanding nuts and bolts, but got a little kind of bored of it because there wasn't a ton going on at that point, but I was just kind of stacking sats the whole time. The Ethereum pitch is what really brought me over the line as, wait a second, now you can have programmable money. Like now, like all of that worked really well in my head of, oh, this is really interesting. This is what I want to spend the rest of my career on. I was working in a variety of startups in between there, and then eventually found my way to Coinbase. And Coinbase was like finishing school for crypto. It's kind of how I think about it. It was a really tricky time for Coinbase when I joined. Market was really shit. There was, again, a lot of promise of what this could be, but a lot of uncertainty. And like one of the stories that I love to tell was, I remember in 2020 when we had the COVID crash, where I swear if Arthur and team at BitMEX didn't turn off the liquidation engine,
It was over.
It was over.
It was
like,
over.
Like crypto was over.
I remember, bro. I remember. I was playing Call of Duty, and I'm watching Twitter as well, and I'm like, I see all the orders fill on Kraken, but the thing keeps going lower and lower and lower. And then I see on Twitter, it's like Arthur Hayes turned off.
Totally.
I'm like, bro, this shit's crazy.
I was gonna say, we pray to Arthur, like thanks again for keeping us all here and giving us jobs. But that was wild, and like there was so much doubt. And then you flash forward, DeFi summer comes along, like things change so dramatically. But at Coinbase, it was amazing. Like got fully like immersed in kind of seeing the future a little bit. And like that's what's nice about big companies is you get to have a really wide landscape, talk to so many interesting teams. Like all of that was pretty cool. But for me, what was kind of stuck in the back of my head was it was very Ethereum centric, and most of the projects that people were building were all focused away from Bitcoin. And that to me was a trade-off that wasn't awesome. Like Bitcoin was what got me into crypto, decentralization so important, and that was, kind of some of the genesis of me getting involved with Cryto.
So let's jump into Core DAO. You look at Bitcoin, you say, hey, this thesis makes sense. There's this other vertical, Ethereum, programmable money, all these other chains, all the temptations of building on the next hottest thing. What is the determining factor? We see now L2s, L1s, all these ecosystems being built on top of Bitcoin. Why was that the obvious choice, or what was the logic or the thought process through building on there versus somewhere else? And how's the build so far?
So kind of the original ideation of like the whole piece was really in reaction to the 2017 cycle. 2017 cycle is where crypto really switched, and it became about launching projects, launching tokens. Like prior to 2017 cycle, like there was a bunch of proof of work forks, like there really wasn't that much going on. And as that kind of developed, we saw the beginning of what I think is a pretty unacceptable trade-off in crypto, which was performance for decentralization. And that really peaked as part of the 2021 cycle, where you saw so many of these tokens launching, where it was 70% insider control, whether that's investors, founders, et cetera. And that was like an allergic reaction to the initial contributors of Core, where it's like, why would we be trying to build this, this freedom money, if you will, if it's controlled by a small group of people? Like that in of itself is a violation of why we're all here. It's the piece of the triangle of the scalability trilemma that you cannot actually trade off. And that kind of rubbed everybody the wrong way. And by kind of going about it from first principles, it was, well, what if we take some of the best parts of the programmable money space, the scalability, all that sort of stuff, but mix it with the decentralization of Bitcoin? Like what if we try to hybridize those two things? And that was the original genesis of what became Core. And it went through many different iterations. And again, there's this larger kind of component with the Bitcoin security budget and ensuring that the Bitcoin network remains healthy and decentralized. Since then, Bitcoin staking has been introduced. But the idea went from, hey, how do we take Bitcoin, Ethereum, hybridize them, take the best pieces, to how do we scale Bitcoin, bring it to billions of people around the world, and build the next great L1?